Okay, so the first person I'd like to invite up for the panel discussion is OB researcher, academic, and expert in the out-of-body experience, Mr. Graham Nichols. Thanks, Ben. Next up, we have Monroe Institute UK lead facilitator, lucid dreaming expert, and OB and lucid dreaming teacher, Luigi Scrambriella. Now, author and philosopher of more books than I have years to my age, Mr. Tim Freke. Whee! Next up, author, speaker, prolific speaker on altered states and borderline areas of human consciousness, Mr. Anthony Peake. Transpersonal psychologist, actor, director, and creativity expert. Please give it up for Dr. Jessica Bockler. And last but not least, Mexican shamanic practitioner, very good friend of mine, an all-round wonderful weirdo, just like me, Sergio Magana. Okay, so your question bit came right at the end there. So I was asking about the contrast between these experiences of kind of light, but also being shown the darkness, the underworld within the outer-body experience.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Is there any particular panelist you'd like to direct that to begin with?
No, anybody who has experience or had a similar story.
Okay, so open to you guys.
Come on, Tim.
Luigi, you sound like you got something to say, and then Sergio.
Okay, yes, I've had that sort of experience. It was, so with the Monroe Institute, we talk about focus levels, so these different states of awareness that you can go into. And one of the states that sounds similar to what you're describing is what we call Focus 23, where the new goners arrive. So once you've left this physical reality, you can be in this kind of in-between state, more like a bardo type of state. It depends how you play the game. You can certainly meet people there and sort of take them further along, if or aspects of yourself that might be dormant. It depends how it plays out. It's not necessarily a separate reality from your own consciousness, but it can certainly seem like that. But when you've been shown this sort of contrast, it's possible to then go back to the lower level and see if there's actually anything there of interest that maybe you can take into the higher parts. So it's worth exploring, but it's certainly not something negative. It can be something that can actually teach you something about yourself.
Brilliant, thank you, Luigi. Sergio?
The first experiences that I had were before I was in the Mexican tradition. So it was like once that I thought that I had an overdose and it was terrible, and the second in a car accident. And I went to these places that weren't like really nice. Then I learned in the tradition that these are the underworlds, and you go to pick traumatized pieces of you, and then you take them back and you heal your traumas. So now I really enjoy when I go to these creepy places to pick pieces of myself.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything else from the panel?
I'll say something. Is my mic on? I think for me the whole thing with I haven't necessarily had experiences of going into a very dark environment or anything like that in an out-of-body experience, but experiences like the bombing that was mentioned in the film. At the time when I had that kind of experience, I was trying to understand why maybe I'm having something like that. Why am I seeing something that's essentially quite a sort of dark, negative thing that someone would do in the world? But I think what ultimately that did is it made me think more about compassion and think more about why someone does a violent or a negative action in the world. So it made me think more about my own role and my own purpose and why people do certain things in the world. And that led me more towards a compassionate, non-violent way of thinking about the world. So I think that's something that you can definitely get from those kinds of experiences. And often those kinds of experiences teach you more in that way than the expansive ones in some senses too.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jessica?
Thank you. So I would add that from the perspective of transpersonal psychology, there are many different maps out there through which we can conceptualize these kinds of experiences. Just to draw from one, if we're looking at Jungian psychology, for example, we understand that there is a shadow part of the psyche, and that we can access this part, and that we want to enter into a relationship with that. We want to dialogue with it. So when you're experiencing this kind of material, how can you access the wisdom that this material contains? Let it speak to you. So really, literally entering into a dialogue, I would draw on creative media in order to facilitate that with a client. But so the idea is that this material is, as has been said by others also, it is not necessarily per se negative. But it contains something. It contains it's like a gateway through which we can access more of ourselves. There's energy that wants to be liberated. We just need to come into a relationship with it.
Yes, what Jessica said. Exactly. Embrace your shadow fully and completely. I've got a question now. I'm going to direct this to both Tim and Anthony. How can out-of-body experiences help us discover the true nature of reality? And you've got 2 minutes.
Well, anything can help you understand the true nature of reality, because everything's real. So whatever you're looking at, what it can show you is that this experience we're having right now of imagination, the psyche or the soul, is actually an enormous dimension of reality. And what you described, I think, is exploring that there's a whole domain that we can go out and journey in. And then what the particular thing which I find most puzzling and interesting, though, isn't that, because you can just head off and do that. It's the ability then to perceive this world without the senses. I think that's the really confronting thing for us to change how we see reality, because what it means is that we can develop a faculty through the imagination, through collecting with this collective soul, to actually be able to perceive things that are coming, and to perceive things which is not where we are locally. So that's quite a transformation of how we see reality, and it opens up a lot of deep questions which I think need deep answers.
I think I'm reminded of the term that Teilhard de Chardin said when he said we are spiritual beings having a physical life. And I think when people have extraordinary experiences, what tends to take place is that suddenly you realize that this physical body, this thing that I'm within, is some kind of a transportation system or something like that. And when you go into these altered states, we have to ask questions, as Tim was saying, as about how is perception working under those circumstances? I mean, I'm seeing you now because electromagnetic energy is hitting my eye and it's being transferred into an electric signal which goes to my visual cortex at the back of my head here. But effectively, when you dream, you're still seeing. When you're in an out-of-body experience, you're still seeing. What is the form of light that's reflecting off the surfaces when you have a near-death experience, when you have an out-of-body experience, when you lucid dream? And I think for me, the most amazing thing was only a few weeks ago, I had my first ever lucid dream. And I'd never lucid dreamt before. I'd tried so hard to become self-aware while I was dreaming, and I could never do it because I'm so profoundly stupid. And then just one time, I come out of a nightclub, and I'm walking down an alleyway, and then suddenly I realized I was dreaming. And it was suddenly, well, what should I do now? Shall I actually jump into the air? Because that's what you're supposed to do. So I did, and I fell to the floor. And then I suddenly found myself floating, and I floated over, and then I actually went around the edge of this, over a wall, and then along this, a bay, really. It was late at night, and I could see cars driving along the bay. And I was flying, and I could actually feel the wind in my hair and everything. And it was such a tactile sensation. And I realized that I was actually physically feeling these things without actually having any physical external stimuli coming in. And when you do that, you suddenly realize this reality, this perceptual reality, this reality that we take for being reality, is just part of a greater reality. But you can never explain that to other people unless they've experienced it.
Mm-hmm. So the focus levels were these labels that Robert Monroe gave to different states of consciousness. And he numbered them because he didn't want to use esoteric terms. So that's basically the reason why we have different focus levels, and people tend to report similar sorts of experiences within the different focus levels, and that's why we have different ones. But certainly you can explore any territory from any of the focus levels, so there's nothing mutually exclusive about them. So focus 10, for instance, is the state of mind awake, body asleep. So your mind is free to wander around while your body feels nicely rested, or you might not even feel your body at all. Focus 21 is a bridge between this and other realities, at least that's how it's sort of described. And so this is usually the first focus level where our fears of the unknown and the fears of death and transition can come about. And the body really feels that, because the body's very much a physical thing and is afraid of maybe what can go beyond. And you know, I mean, some of you maybe have seen the movie Insidious, and this idea that comes up from time to time in the forums, and I might get a phone call every maybe 6 months or something like that from someone saying, if I go out of my body, is somebody going to come in and snatch it and make me do weird things? And I say, yes. And then I say, no, it's not like that. But the body's a perishable thing. We can die. Physically, certainly we can die, and we do. Nobody here is going to get out alive physically. And that comes about usually when you start approaching the territories of 21. The way you go beyond it is by constantly doing it and finding out that actually you don't die. Then you go past the physical fear, and the mind is still free to wander. Every single night when you go to sleep, you die. You know, you put yourself in a coma for about 8 hours, and you don't seem to really care about doing that. Otherwise, nobody would sleep, right? So it's perfectly natural. It's just that you don't think about doing it, and it's the same sort of thing with 21. You're just taking your conscious awareness, this level of reality awareness, with you. So practice, practice, practice. I hope that answers your question.
Jessica, one of the main parts of your research, I know, are extraordinary experiences. Can you tell us about that and how the out-of-body experience might relate or not to the concept of exploration of extraordinary experiences?
Thank you, Charlie. I come to extraordinary experiences through a slightly different pathway, really, and that's it's exploring creativity, embodied creativity. I trained in acting and directing at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, and at the same time as I was doing that, this is some 20 years ago, I was training as a mediator, working in conflict resolution with the Council of Europe. I'm bringing this up now because doing that work exposed me to moments of extraordinary experiences that then really further informed my life path over the past 20 years. So in the conflict resolution training that I undertook, we were working with some 30 young people from all across Europe. This is the late 1990s, and there were 2 young men there from Kosovo and Serbia. And if you think back to the late 1990s, this was the time of the Balkan Wars. And these 2 young men, during one of our trainings, went into a simulation of conflict, which very quickly became real because it was rooted in their experience of conflict in their homeland. And I remember being a young mediator, role-playing, being both actor and not actor, really anymore, transcending this notion of I'm simulating something. Being in the room with these 2 young men, and the young man from the Kosovo had brought a brick in his suitcase, which he put on the table in front of us, and he said, this is how the mediation opened, and he said, this is all that is left of my home. Just thinking back to that moment, it was an incredibly powerful moment. And what followed were 5 hours of intense mediation, using a very heart-based model of conflict resolution where we were connecting to each other, we were connecting, empathizing with what was present in the room, sensing what was in the room and mirroring that back. It was a deep practice of empathy. And within that time, those 5 hours, time became, it evaporated. There was no time. It was a timeless experience. And I felt an immense opening of the heart. And the body fell away. There was no body. There was only an expansive state of consciousness, cosmic consciousness. The walls of the room fell away. It felt like we were one. It was a deep oneness. And I also remember picking up information that I couldn't have possibly known. At one point, there was a thought that popped into my head, giving me information that something was wrong with the son of the lead mediator in the room. And then some 10 seconds later, there was a knock on the door. The door opened, the lead mediator was called out. She came back into the room and she said, "My son is ill. I have to go. My son has been in an accident." And so she left. So I had accessed information I couldn't have possibly known. And this experience, this sense of oneness, the deep sense of interconnectedness that I experienced there stayed with me. And I followed through with that in my performing arts training, and the performing arts became the vehicle for me for exploring a deep sense of verticality, expansive states of consciousness, how we can step out of the ordinary self through the performing arts, through dance, singing, through theatre.
Yeah, so let's bring back from that. Let's go for the original question about safety and mentorship around OBE, so we keep that focused. Graham, would you like to answer this?
I think the key factor there is that people on occasion get scared in experiences, but in the 30 years I've been doing this, I've yet to hear of anyone who's actually been harmed in any way, shape or form. It's about as dangerous as doing meditation or any other consciousness practice. I don't see any real issues with it. I've done extensive research to try and find any example of anyone being harmed and never found anything. I get lots of reports of people who, for example, maybe experience something like sleep paralysis and then they get scared because they're in sleep paralysis. I don't have out-of-body experiences from sleep or sleep paralysis, so I generally recommend avoiding that approach because that bypasses the fear factor there. Then also, I think the real issues is just to sort of work on those fears, work on breaking down beliefs. There's so many false beliefs related to this practice. As we sort of saw in the film, it's more about an extension of consciousness. It's a very natural thing. It's a lot of the researchers don't even believe that we're in our body in the first place, that our consciousness is outside of the body, that it's extended, that it's... So this whole idea that by coming out of the body something bad can happen, I think it's kind of looking at it in the wrong way. I think this whole practice leads to healing and positive effects, because, like you saw in the film. The only downside is fear, essentially, and that's something we have to work on within ourselves.
Tim?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think, well, there's two things. One that's come up from what you said, which is just to point out the obvious as we explore this, which is you're already outside your body. You're having an experience all the time of being, well, you look, just have a look now in your actual experience. You're actually experiencing a sensual world through the body, and you're experiencing a completely different experience of the imagination, where you're experiencing images, where you're understanding the meaning of these words, for instance, and that's nowhere. You can't point to it. It doesn't exist within the sensory world. It's not in the world of the body. We're always in these two worlds. We're always in body and soul. It's not controversial that we're body and psyche. That's just what we are. The question is, what happens? Can they separate? Or can you go off so deeply into one? Or can you explore this one through that one and not just through the eyes? These are all interesting things, but that you are out of that you are experiencing a dimension of existence which is not made of matter, you're doing that all the time. It's impossible not to do that. You go off into that world in dreams, but you're always in it. You're never just in this one. So that's uncontroversial. And then with your question about whether the OBE, I don't have enough knowledge about the OBE to really comment on that, but what I do know is that I think generally with these more emergent states of consciousness or more emergent states of soul as they arise, is that it's much healthier if it's on a solid foundation of the self. So you've grown deliberately up into an individual, and you want to strengthen that thing which often gets attacked, in my view, the ego or the separate self, to be a foundation from which you can wake up to something which is more than that. And if you don't have a solid foundation, that's when it can become problematic, and you can see people having deep experiences. They're what Carl Jung called a failed initiation. They're kind of, you enter into psychological disturbed states because you haven't got a strong enough foundation. And I think sometimes the thing which pulls you back, which is often seen as, ooh, the grasping of the limited self and all that, it's actually wisdom. It's the thing going, not yet, just build this up. It's like with kids, it's like, when my kids were coming of age where there was a good chance they were going to experiment with psychedelics like I did, my advice to them was don't take yourself to pieces until you've built it up. Once it's strong, then you can catapult off into these other realms. And I think sometimes the thing which gets fearful is, it's like, not yet. Just build it up, and then from that you can go deeper.
Can I just add a little bit? Yeah, just to echo both of those. As far as, yes, dangers in the actual state itself, I've not found any. Certainly nothing that might have appeared negative that didn't help me in some sort of way to grow. But the grounding and the integration is vital. I think when you come back and if they lead to more dissociation, then you need to strengthen the ego self. This is very important. It reminds me of, just speaking about in Thailand, the guy who I work with, he spent 6 months a year there, and they say to him, we're there, the spirituality is part of the culture, meditation and so on, so out-of-body experiences are very, very normal. But what they say is, if you have out-of-body experiences from meditation, no problem, but if you have too many, go to see the monks, right? There's something not quite right. You're dissociating too regularly, so you need to strengthen the sense of self. So when you have these experiences, absolutely make sure that it comes back here and that you're able to integrate and understand these experiences and how they help to support and maybe open your sense of self and your decision space in this reality. Yeah.
Great. Just to add something to, am I allowed to add something to that? Yeah? Okay. From a Buddhist, I asked this to my Buddhist teacher. If I go out, what if I don't come back? What if I die? This kind of thing. And he laughed. You wish it were that easy. And I said, what do you mean? He said two things. He said, your karma is so strongly linked to this physical body to which it self-identifies that until you have fully exhausted your karmic traces and habitual tendencies, you will have to come back to this body to continue working with those karmic debts and karmic exhaustions that need to occur. And the second thing he said was at one point, so that was the kind of bigger picture, and he said at a lower level, however far you go out your body, at one point you're going to need to eat or you're going to need to shit, and that will bring you back to your body. Isn't that cool? Even if you're out for like 5 hours, at some point your body will need to eat or need to shit, and that will bring you back to your body, so you can chill. I would like to ask a question to Sergio. We heard a little bit in the film about the tradition that you're part of and how out-of-body experiences play a part in it. For people who might be thinking that, astral projection, out-of-body experience was something in the kind of 80s New Age scene that was developed and it's all kind of hippie and New Agey, can you tell us how far back does this go in the Mexican tradition? And how long is the lineage that is boarded up to date with the Mexican out-of-body experience practices?
Well, because there may be two answers, because officially these lineages come from like 2,000 and something years, but non-officially in the oral tradition, 50,000 at least, that they were said that they were the first dreamers, the people of the halo of the moon. And actually, like I said in the film, this was a training for dying at the end. I experienced it while living, like I said, in extreme situations first, but then I began like the research. And actually, it's quite extreme because the trainings are you actually do with venoms of serpent to paralyze the body and then to dissociate from this body and then to pretend...
with snake venom?
Snake, yeah, rattlesnake venom. Actually, I do it in my retreats in Mexico. Everywhere else
Sign
is
up.
forbidden. But and to practice how it's going to be after that, dying. And I asked one of my teachers that he's hilarious, Hugo, is it safe also? And he told me, it's a lot safer than going to Tepito. That is one of the most dangerous parts of Mexico City.
One of the
most dangerous parts
right,
of Mexico
yeah.
City. So he told me, don't worry. It's a lot safer to have an out of the body to practice your death than going to Tepito. So after that, I was never scared. And actually, but I think it's good to have a map, like to do it like with one purpose, or going to the underworlds to rescue things, or going to the heavens to create, or trying to practice dying from here and going to the sun, or here to become what we call in the tradition a pipiltin or angel, or an Awal Buddha avatar from here. And when I practice, I do it with a purpose, not just like to have the experience, because those ones, like when I saw the car crashing and then, am I dead or not, are not like, okay, I knew that I was more than my body, but I didn't see quite the benefit, only like when I came back so scared, was I dead? But when you do it with a purpose and that, it's, wow, it's so beautiful.
Thank you. And interesting there, actually, what you said about your teacher and what I said about my teacher, and the question about having a lineage or mentor. I guess that's being answered too. Because if you do have a teacher or mentor that you can rely on, then I think it gives you the confidence to have these experiences far more than if you're going out blind alone.
Why do people associate out-of-body experiences with...
Yeah, whenever I hear about out-of-body experiences, which I love the idea of it, always seems to imply that the religion is reincarnation which goes with it.
Yeah.
Could it be something else?
Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't be. I think what is interesting is how prevalent the idea of reincarnation is. Certainly in the Gnostic tradition, which you were referencing, it was seen in that way. So I think the idea there is simply that this imaginary realm that we're having this conversation in right now, just as you have an individual body and your individual body is discrete, but it's actually part of a vast ecology of life which you couldn't exist without. You're embodied, you're in it. In the same way, in the psyche, in the soul, in the imagination, you have a discrete soul, but it's embodied in an ecology of soul, which is a whole dimension of existence in the same way. And that what you're doing as you go deeper into it is you're able to then go off and explore that deeper ecology, a kind of collective dream. And that death is that you will go off into a world of images, which is why, in my view, it's something which has evolved with the evolution of the psyche. This other realm has come into existence. So one of the things that fascinates me in the history of the esoteric teachings of the world, you can actually kind of see this imaginal realm developing. If you look at what people said about death, you can see it starting off as a world of shades, kind of something which is almost there. It's going to become a world of projection of wishful thinking, so like this world but better, the drinking halls of Valhalla, the happy hunting grounds, and of course the negative side of it as well, but again projections of this life. And then by the time you get NDEs now, you've got vast cities. We went through a religious stage where you'd meet Buddhas and angels and all of that, and you can still have all of that, but now we've got vast cities and the imagination has become huge, and gardens and everything. So I think this imaginal realm has evolved, just like the ecology of life, the ecology of soul. The imaginal realm has evolved, and we're in it now. But we're just, in the surface, the beginning of it, which we get catapulted into in these other states through things like DMT or ayahuasca or dying, or through out-of-body experiences or other forms that you can explore the imaginal realms. The root, I think, to the idea that comes back to reincarnation is the idea that you're still not completely independent from the thing that's arisen from, and that there is a kind of a tendency to pull you back to these other states, an embodied state, and that you, whilst you can exist in that realm for a while, that the soul needs to root itself back into biology and into matter and then arise up again. And there's a whole discussion which will go way beyond 2 minutes for that. But that, I think, is where it comes back to.
Can I make a comment? It's quite an interesting point here. Some of the developing science at the moment in terms of the true nature of reality is that, and you've probably heard this mentioned many times, is that this is some form of simulation. And if we're existing in a simulation, our consciousness is part of that simulation. Now, if this is the case, that everything we perceive is in fact digital information, or as what David Bohm called information, when we talk about consciousness, consciousness is just something that is perceiving something. Now, effectively, we were talking here about reincarnation. Now, just for a second, let's just suggest the idea that you are living in a simulation of your own life, and that you can live the simulation of your own life many, many times in exactly the same way as, for instance, you can do in a third-person RPG game, whereby you go back to the start of your life and you live it again, and you live it again, and you live it again. Here we have a scenario that it could be that things are far more complex or far more simple than we'd ever believed it to be, because they're now discovering the digitization of space. There's some analysis being done at the moment at the Perimeter Institute in America by a guy called Craig Hogan, and they're actually looking for the digitization of this reality. So suddenly what our ideas about what we are and where we sit within things is far more complex. Because remember, the universe itself started as a point, and the Big Bang was created. And if that was the point, that everything was a single point of information, and everything expands outwards, we're just all part of that simple point of information. So we are all part of the same thing. We are all part of a singularity.
Next question to Graham. As a researcher and academic in the out-of-body experience, what's next? What's kind of on the cutting edge of OB research at the moment? Like new techniques, new tools, connection with virtual reality, if there is one?
Oh boy.
2 minutes, go.
Just bring it nice and close to your mouth.
I think for me the fundamental thing that I'm most interested in, we can get really caught up in all the conjecture, and I think this is how reality is and all of this kind of stuff. I think for me, I want to really take it down to the sort of nuts and bolts and really go into the experiences. I think the problem so far with the research is there's no talk of the actual details of the experience. We still don't understand how we see, how we feel, how the actual experience unfolds. I mean, there's still huge gaps in that area. And I think this applies to so many states of consciousness. And I feel like we're still in this, we have this desire often to do this sort of top-down thinking, where we kind of, this big, let's have an explanation for everything. And I think we've really got to get down actually to the details and to say, okay, so how do I perceive when I'm in an out-of-body experience? How do those eyes that are not eyes, how do they work? Does everybody see the same when they have an out-of-body experience? Does everybody experience the same kind of reality? Even when they're in this reality, how does it look? Is there any consistency to why people experience particular places, particular times? Why do some people have precognitive experiences? There's so many aspects of it, these questions that haven't been asked yet, and I just feel like, for me, the research I want to be involved with is asking those questions and really getting into it, which is why I've been involved with the Ryan Research Center in the US and trying to actually do experiments and actually sort of ask these questions and see if, okay, can you perceive things at a distance? Are there particular qualities to seeing things at a distance? For example, in near-death experiences, people often they'll perceive small three-dimensional objects, for example. So the Sam Parnier study was mentioned, where they tried to actually find evidence for people perceiving outside of their bodies. But no one actually said, what do people perceive when they're out of their bodies in general, in near-death experiences or in any out-of-body experience? It was just assumed that it's the same as how I see right now. So therefore, if I just use an image that's roughly as I see now, then people will see it. But the reality is in OBEs, people do see things quite differently. Sometimes in my precognitive experiences, they've all been blue-grey, for example. What does that mean? There's just so many questions, I think, and I think getting into that is really what excites me right now.
In an outer body, I'm definitely tactile. And so my vision is quite strange. It's like a blended sense. I kind of push a feeling sense, a tactile feeling sense into the environment, and I perceive a felt sense of what's around me, so I don't bump into anything. In a lucid dream, I'm more visual. It's more of a visual color environment. So those are the sorts of things that I look out for, but that's just my style. You know, some people really, they read about all kinds of out-of-body experiences. I saw this and there was a light and everything. But that's not everyone. Some people hear things more than anything else. They're getting voices in, they're getting crashing sounds and whatever else. Or they have the vibrations and they stay more on the tactile. I'm one of those guys. So first of all, find out through repeated entry into these states, how does the energy in your body feel? And then you'll get an idea. Then the malleability of the state. I find that the out of body for me is less malleable than the dream state. When I'm in the dream, then I can change anything. I can change my form. I can become everything in the scene. In an out of body, I can't really do that. My perspective is more fixed. That's not to say that I can't feel my way through whatever's happening there, but I have far more flexibility in the dream state because it's all an aspect of myself. So I'm just taking a perspective within that. So that's kind of my experience anyway. Don't know if anyone else wants to
say it. In my experience, in and out of the body, you have like this vibration before. And then when you're out, if you see your body, I always try like to change it, not my body, but exactly like or colors or my pajama or whatever, or naked or not, and like that. And if it changes, I'm dreaming, and if not, I'm out of the body. But I think the border is so thin because sometimes you're in this out of the body, you are doing something, and then you end in a dream, and so. I think you transit from one to the other, and like that, and many of the times. In the ones that I had awakened, like from awake with these stressful situations, you don't transit because you were awake. You just land in your body like, but in the ones that had been sleeping and this, yeah, I just check if I may change, and then normally I finish in a dream.
Sorry to chip back in. You said a previous point about having a purpose, having an intention for the experience, and I think this is, you know, not to sort of move away from your question a little bit, but that for me is far more important. What are you doing? What are you getting out of this experience? How is it helping your life in any sort of way? Rather than fixating, and I'm not saying you are doing, on whether it's a lucid dream or an out-of-body experience. Because I think sometimes we can focus too much on the technique and wanting to get into the car without actually then going anywhere. You know, you can sit in the vehicle and going, oh, wow, isn't the engine great? You go, go somewhere. So having an intention and then seeing how it then translates into this life experience, and maybe even some of the experiences that you could have in an altered state, can drive the learning and the understanding far better than, and then you'll also get a bit more of a feel for what these different states can actually do for you, which will then drive the experience even more than just thinking, how do I get out? And then, you know, have I seen my body or not? And that sort of thing.
On that, because I think that's at the heart of what all of this is about. Yes, at the end of your question, you asked, what is this all for? Why is this happening? Or where is it heading, right? And I would encourage you and everyone else, all of us, to really become researchers of our own experience, to really discern and spend time sitting with that. What is happening? Why is it happening? You can map your own experience, you can journal, you can create artwork, for example, to kind of visually map what is happening, finding other ways to monitor and track experience so that you get a handle on why are things happening when, but then also asking those ultimate questions. Why am I here? What is my personal sense of purpose? What is it that I'm meant to create? And then there's something about getting out of the way of oneself, because that's the ego bit, right? So there's something that wants to come through you, that can only come through you. And in a way, we all need to practice deeply aligning ourselves with that which wants to come through us and giving that its voice. And the voice may come through an out-of-body experience. Something you may be catching glimpses of that. It may be a lucid dream where something is being communicated. So in a way, it's all about noticing what is this communication about that is coming through me, what wants to be expressed, giving that a voice, entering into a relationship with that, amplifying it through various techniques and media, and boom, maybe we're not only shifting our own state of mind and consciousness, but perhaps there's something here about shifting collectively. Yeah? Our world is in such a bloody mess, excuse the language, right? We're in need of individual healing, but also collective healing. We have to build bridges. We have to break down the divides that we're perceiving everywhere right now, whether it's in politics or in the economy and God knows where, education, health, and so on, right? These states have some role to play in that. They're showing us that we're much more, we're interconnected, we're extraordinary beings, and we can do so much more for each other, for our own flourishing, but also for planetary flourishing. So there's something here that we need to take responsibility of, and we can start with our own experience, really sensing into that, really deeply exploring that, giving that voice, and then from there, perhaps something will happen that will surprise us all.
Thank you. Question for Anthony. How might the out-of-body experience be used as a mode of communication with other dimensions of reality and the entities that may exist within those other dimensions of reality?
A very interesting question.
It was just for you.
Thank you. Because I've just spent the last 6 or 7 months writing a book on this very subject. And the idea in terms of when people are in altered states of consciousness and they encounter entities, what is the nature of those entities? Because they seem to have independent existence. They seem to have independent motivations, and indeed in many cases they actually impart information that the perceiver does not know about. So the thing is, where are they from? Are they just extensions of our own subconscious? Because if they are, how on earth do they have information we don't know about? And also, how is it they don't fulfill our own expectations? I mean, I'm particularly fascinated with people who take dimethyltryptamine and the famous elves that people have experiences of. Why is it that dimethyltryptamine seems to facilitate elves and pixies and elementals? Whereas when people are in ordinary out-of-the-body experiences, they don't tend to. They tend to see them tend to mix up with normal human beings or possibly shamanic entities, possibly in shamanic guiding entities. And I'm coming to the conclusion that it seems that we are a collective consciousness and we attune into this collective conscious or the Jungian collective unconscious when we're in these states. And these things will embody themselves in whatever we feel that they should be in order for us to pick up the message. For example, when people have near-death experiences, they encounter normally the being of light or the beings of light. Now, these entities again seem to be there as some form of guide to help somebody through the passage through from this existence to another existence. Now, again, where are these beings from? When people like Sherry, when you have mediumistic communications with spirit guides, the spirit guides clearly are related to you in some way, but effectively they again impart information that you can't possibly know about. So it seems to be, I wrote a book a few years ago with Irvin Laszlo, and one of the things we discussed there was about the idea of the Akashic field, the Akashic record, that there's some form of informational field, what the physicists would call the zero-point field, and we seem to be able to impart under certain liminal states of consciousness, we seem to be able to attune into this. I have to say, after finishing the book, I'm still quite unclear, and I want to now write a second book on the science of it. But the experiential definitely suggests to me that there's something greatly mysterious about this. And I'm very interested if there's anybody out there who's had experiences of this nature, where you've encountered beings that are not you, what these beings are and the information they've imparted. I'm very keen to hear from you.
So the question is, are there any comments on the experience that you just described? Okay, perfect. To our panel. Yep, Sergio's good to go after Luigi.
No, go ahead.
I understand perfectly the lady, because sometimes happen when you begin having these experiences, then you see that you can have consciousness in both parts. For example, one that for me was like marking, I was really scared about a student, actually in this country. So I was guiding like this experience about lucid dreaming, but I was so scared about her that I began vibrating and boom. So suddenly I saw my body from this body to that body, and this one was looking at the lady so that she didn't move in order that I could jump, and I kept talking and guiding the exercise. That's when I realized, oh wow, you can be here, there, and everywhere. And you function. And it's like, but it's very weird because it's like your perception being in two parts at the same time. And I knew that this one had to keep the workshop, the other one was to keep the eye on the lady, and this one to be aware of if you have to jump.
Just for Luigi, that's very interesting. I think this might be a common stress-related workshop leader thing. When I first started teaching, about 10 years ago, I was teaching on this really complicated Tibetan Buddhist stuff. I didn't really know what I was talking. I still don't know what I'm talking about, but back then I really didn't know what I was talking about. And I was in this little retreat, and I'm sitting there talking, and I completely forgot the name of the Buddhist lineage, which doesn't seem like a lot, but for me that was really shaming. It was, oh, you don't even know the name of the lineage, man, and you think you're teaching. No, so real shame and shock, and I went, and I was up in the corner of the room watching myself, still going, oh yeah, this about Buddhism, blah, blah, blah. But I was there and there at the same time, this kind of stress or almost like stress or shame-induced, whether it was an out-of-body experience or some sort of dissociation, who knows. But yes, I know exactly what you mean. Luigi.
All right, so let's see here. So in those three experiences, I'm picking up a lot about anxiety and maybe even a control aspect. And what you have in your experience in particular is this part of yourself that said, actually, it's okay. And you can trust that this experience will be safe, and it might feel like you don't have control in this situation, and it might feel a tumultuous time in your life or whatever it is, but you're safe. It's going to be all right. You're going to be able to get across that road. So this is where we can also, in these states, trust the process a little bit. You see, we think we're this person on the ground here having to do all the hard work, but there's this huge part of ourselves also sitting in the background that looks after us, and we just have to listen to it. And, we can take DMT and we can do all kinds of weird and wonderful practices, but every single night that door opens up automatically for every single one of you, several times a night. And that voice is just reflecting back what you're thinking and what you're feeling, especially in the day and in your regular life, and we mostly ignore it. So here, that's in a very powerful way, pulling you out and saying, look at where you are right now, and I've got your back, you're okay, And whether you want to do that by catapulting yourself out of body and trusting that actually you have the resources inside yourself to deal with the situation, it's okay. But it's that fearlessness also that then develops with these sorts of practices, that you say, I don't have to do everything on my own, because the bigger I is also involved here.
And just before we finish, me and Jay just, if this goes badly, it's my fault actually, not Jay's, but Jay had agreed to it. I thought it'd be quite funny to use the boxing timer on my phone, which has little ding-dings, do 1 minute rounds and ask every one of these panelists, what is consciousness, within 1 minute, and see if they can, just for a bit of fun to finish. So let's start. You mind starting, Graham?
We don't know yet.
Wait, I haven't done the timer. Damn it. Okay, so Graham's winning right now, way under a minute. Go!
No idea. Really, no idea. It's weird. I think it's certain things. My perception is going to distort all of that. No, I have no idea, but I'm exploring something within it. I know that there's something weird going on, and sometimes I'm a subject in a world of objects, and you're experiencing that the other way around. So there's something worth exploring, but honestly, I don't know.
Me neither.
Hang on, got to take a big breath. Ready?
Come on.
Hang on. Oh no, it's gone to an app. Sorry.
Gaming.
Go!
Everything in the universe is individuating right down from simple molecules, and therefore everything has an individual relationship with the whole. That's subjectivity. Subjectivity has been evolving alongside objectivity. Subjectivity turns into sentience, turns into imagination. Consciousness is simply when we prejudice some of that information that we're receiving from the world over other bits of information. Everything else is unconscious, the bit you prejudice is conscious. So consciousness is essentially paying attention, and that's how you experience it throughout every moment of your life.
Wowza.
consciousness is my feeling of awe listening to Tim's exposition there and thinking to myself, how on earth am I going to follow that? All I know is that I'm something perceiving something, and that is as far as my understanding of consciousness goes. When you think it's the most personal thing to all of us, it's the only thing we know with absolute certitude exists. And the question is everything else just an extension of my consciousness? In which case that's solipsism. Or is it that everything is consciousness and I'm just an embodied part of a huge consciousness field? And that's what I'd like to believe it is, but we are still at the first point of David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness. Whee! Did I manage to follow him? Wow.
This is consciousness. Right here, right now, between us. In that moment of silence, the presence that arises. All of that and more.
That is consciousness of time. No, I don't really know exactly what it is, but I think your level of consciousness is how much you perceive. There is a perception of time, there is a perception in silence, there is a perception in sound, there is a perception in words, in dreams. So how much you are able to perceive will be your level of consciousness. And I think our goal here is to expand it, to try to become one, or to perceive like everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, I'm so glad I don't have to answer that. Okay, I would like to invite our panelists to leave the stage, and let's applaud them as they leave the stage. To our panelists. Woo, 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 woo.